"Get out, you're not welcome here," my son said, slamming the door in my face on Christmas Eve. I'd driven through the rain with a $75,000 Tesla stock gift, hoping to heal our broken family. Instead, I stood humiliated in that elegant hallway while they laughed inside. They thought I was just a desperate old father with no power left. What they didn't know was that I'd built a Silicon Valley empire from nothing, and I knew exactly how to take everything away. One phone call the next morning changed their lives forever. Before we continue, please subscribe for more stories and let us know in the comments which state you're watching from. My name is Robert Mitchell, and what I'm about to tell you changed my entire perspective on family and blood forever. The phone call that changed everything came when I least expected it. I was sitting in my mahogany study that Tuesday evening, December 20th, surrounded by quarterly reports and the soft glow of my desk lamp. The house felt particularly quiet that night, with only the gentle tick of Margaret's antique clock on the mantel and the distant hum of traffic from Highway 101. I'd been reviewing some construction contracts, trying to keep my mind occupied as the holidays approached. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. These days, most calls after 7 p.m. were either telemarketers or business emergencies I wasn't in the mood to handle. But something made me reach for the receiver. "Dad," Emma's voice came through bright and warm, immediately cutting through the evening's solitude. "Emma, sweetheart," I said, setting down my reading glasses. "This is a pleasant surprise. How are you doing?" "I'm doing great, Dad, but more importantly, I have wonderful news about Christmas." There was an excitement in her voice I hadn't heard in quite some time. "David and Sarah want to host Christmas dinner this year at their place in Soma." I felt my heart skip a beat. David and Sarah hosting. It had been a very long time since I'd received any kind of invitation from my son and his wife. "Really?" I tried to keep the surprise out of my voice, but I'm sure Emma could hear it anyway. "Yes, really." Emma laughed, that musical sound that always reminded me of her mother. "Dad, I know things have been complicated between you and David lately, but it's Christmas. It's time our family came together again." I leaned back in my leather chair, processing this unexpected development. "When were you thinking?" "Christmas Eve around 7 p.m. Just family. You, me, David, Sarah, and little Tyler. Nothing fancy, just a nice dinner together." Emma paused. "Dad, I really think this could be good for all of us. We need this." The hope in her voice was infectious. Despite everything that had happened, despite the growing distance I'd felt from David over the past couple of years, this felt like an olive branch, maybe even a Christmas miracle. "What should I bring?" I found myself asking. "Just yourself, Dad. That's all any of us need." Emma's voice softened. "I've already talked to David about it. He's ready for this too." After we worked out the logistics, the address and Soma parking arrangements, the time, I found myself staring at the phone long after Emma had hung up. The quiet house suddenly felt different, less empty somehow. For the first time in months, I had something to look forward to. I walked over to the window overlooking my garden where the outdoor Christmas lights I'd half-heartedly put up were twinkling against the December darkness. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was time for our family to heal whatever wounds had opened up between us. I should have known that hope could be the most dangerous emotion of all. Emma's call transported me back to when this family was whole. After hanging up, I found myself drawn to the silver-framed photograph on my desk. Margaret and me on our wedding day, 1978. Her radiant smile seemed to light up the room even now 26 years after that perfect June afternoon in Napa Valley. That picture always had the power to unlock a flood of memories, and tonight was no different. I could still remember those early days when we had nothing but dreams and determination. We started the company in our garage in Menlo Park, back when Silicon Valley was still more orchards than office buildings. Margaret would bring me coffee at 2 in the morning when I was hunched over circuit boards and business plans, never once complaining about the uncertainty or the 18-hour days. "This is going to work, Robert," she'd say, rubbing my shoulders as I stared at spreadsheets that never seemed to balance. "I believe in us." And she was right. By the mid-'80s, we'd moved out of the garage and into our first real office. By the 90s, we had employees, government contracts, and a reputation for innovation that opened doors across the industry. When we went public in 2002, Margaret insisted we celebrate not with champagne and caviar, but with pizza and root beer floats, the same thing we'd shared on our first date. But success never changed what mattered most to Margaret, our family: Christmas was her masterpiece every year. She'd spend weeks planning elaborate dinners that brought together not just our immediate family, but aunts, uncles, cousins, and anyone else who might be spending the holidays alone. Our dining room table would groan under the weight of her famous honey-glazed ham homemade rolls and at least 6 different desserts. I can still hear the sound of children's laughter echoing through our Atherton home. David and Emma racing down the stairs Christmas morning, their faces glowing with excitement as they discovered what Santa had left under the tree. Margaret would sit in her favorite armchair, still in her robe, watching their joy with tears of happiness in her eyes. Those were golden years in every sense. Family vacations to Lake Tahoe every summer where we'd rent the same cabin and spend lazy afternoons fishing while Margaret read novels on the dock. Emma learning to water ski while David perfected his cannonball technique. Margaret was the heart of it all, the gravitational force that kept our little solar system in perfect orbit. Even when the company grew beyond our wildest dreams, when we moved into the mansion and could afford private schools and European vacations, Margaret kept us grounded. She was our peacemaker when teenage emotions ran high, our voice of reason when business decisions got complicated, our reminder that family always came first. The cancer diagnosis came in the spring of 2018, pancreatic stage 3. For 18 months, we fought it together with everything we had. The best doctors' experimental treatments, prayer circles, and sheer stubborn determination. Margaret faced it all with the same grace she'd brought to everything else in her life. Our last Christmas together in 2019 was bittersweet perfection. Margaret was thin and tired, but she still insisted on cooking her famous ham. We all knew it would be our final holiday as a complete family, and we savored every moment, the carols around the piano, the silly family games, the way Margaret's eyes still sparkled when she watched her grandchildren play. She passed away 3 weeks later on a quiet Tuesday morning in January with David, Emma, and me holding her hands. At the funeral, I looked at our family gathered in that church and thought we'd weather this storm together, the way we'd weathered everything else. Margaret had been our foundation, but surely the structure she'd built would hold. Without Margaret, we began drifting apart like ships without an anchor. The woman who stole my son came disguised as love. David met Sarah in the spring of 2021, about 18 months after we'd lost his mother. He was still grieving, still finding his footing as a single man in his 30s, and I suppose that made him vulnerable in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Sarah Martinez was everything that caught the eye. Strikingly beautiful with long dark hair and the kind of confident smile that belonged on magazine covers. Which made sense considering she was a social media influencer with over 500,000 followers on Instagram. She documented her life in carefully curated posts about wellness, luxury travel, and what she called authentic living. When David first brought her to Sunday dinner at my house, I tried to be welcoming. She was charming enough, asking thoughtful questions about the business and complimenting the wine selection. But there was something in the way she observed everything. The artwork, the furniture, the view of the bay, like she was taking inventory. "Your father is very to be involved in your life," she mentioned to David during that first visit, her tone light but pointed. It must be nice to have that kind of support system. The word involved hung in the air like a question mark. Over the following months, I watched my son begin to change in subtle ways. Our weekly lunch meetings became bi-weekly, then monthly. When I'd call to check in, his responses grew shorter, more distant. He started using phrases I'd never heard from him before. "I need to establish my own path, Dad," he'd say when I offered him a consulting opportunity. "Sarah thinks it's important for me to build something independently. Sarah thinks." Those 2 words became the preface to every conversation we had. At family gatherings, she'd make comments that sounded supportive, but carried an edge. "It's so sweet how close you and David are," she'd tell me with that perfect smile. Not every father is so hands-on with their adult children. Her strategy was masterful in its subtlety. She never directly criticized me or suggested David cut ties. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt, disguised as observations about independence and self-reliance. "Real men don't need their father's money to succeed." I overheard her telling David one evening when they thought I was out of earshot. "You're so much more capable than you give yourself credit for." By the time they got engaged in late 2021, David had already begun refusing my help with everything from job opportunities to financial advice. The wedding itself in September of 2022 cost me nearly $150,000, but Sarah barely acknowledged my contribution. She was too busy orchestrating the perfect Instagram moment. The transformation accelerated after they married. David, who had once called me every few days just to chat, would go weeks without contact. When we did speak, he seemed like a stranger, using corporate buzzwords about establishing boundaries and creating healthy distance. Emma tried to warn me. "Dad, I don't think Sarah has your best interests at heart," she'd say during our regular coffee dates. Or David's, for that matter. But I kept making excuses. Marriage changes people. He's just finding his independence. These things take time to sort themselves out. By 2023, the truth was undeniable. Sarah had won. She'd successfully repositioned me in David's mind from loving father to overbearing obstacle. Every gesture of support became evidence of my need to control. Every offer of help became proof of my lack of faith in his abilities. I'd lost my son to a woman who saw our family not as something to join, but as something to conquer. But Emma's invitation offered one last chance. I believed the perfect gift could heal any wound. The idea came to me on Friday morning, December 22nd, as I sat in my study with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. Emma's invitation had given me hope, but I knew I couldn't walk into David's home empty-handed. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was my chance to rebuild a relationship that had been crumbling for 2 years. What would matter to David? What would show him that I understood who he'd become, not just who he used to be? The answer hit me while scrolling through the financial news on my tablet. Tesla stock had just announced another breakthrough in their autonomous driving technology, and the market was responding with enthusiasm. David had always been fascinated by innovation by companies that were reshaping the future. As a Google engineer, he'd appreciate the technical brilliance behind Tesla's approach. More importantly, it wasn't just a gift. It was an investment in his family's future. I drove to the Tesla showroom in Palo Alto that afternoon, where the gleaming Model S sedans and Cybertrucks drew crowds of curious onlookers. The sales manager, a sharp young woman named Jessica, listened carefully as I explained what I wanted. "You're looking to gift $75,000 in Tesla stock?" she asked, her eyebrows rising slightly. "For my son and his family," I confirmed. "I want them to have something that will grow in value, something that represents possibility." Jessica connected me with Tesla's corporate gift program, and by 4 p.m. we had the framework in place. The actual stock certificates would be prepared by my financial advisor, but Tesla would provide the presentation materials, a sleek portfolio with the company's logo embossed in silver. Saturday morning found me in downtown Palo Alto, at the offices of Henderson Financial, where I'd managed my investments for over a decade. My advisor, Michael Henderson, had seen me through the company's IPO and understood the significance of large financial decisions. "$75,000 is substantial, Robert," he said as we reviewed the transfer documents. "Are you certain about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied, signing the authorization forms. The stock certificates were printed on heavy paper with elegant borders and official seals. Michael arranged for them to be placed in a custom leather portfolio, deep burgundy leather with gold embossing that read, "Mitchell Family Trust." Inside, a personalized letter explained the gift and my hopes for their future. But the presentation had to be perfect. I spent Sunday afternoon at a high-end stationery store in Stanford Shopping Center, selecting wrapping paper that was sophisticated without being flashy, deep forest green with a subtle gold pattern. The ribbon was silk-tied in a precise bow that took me 3 attempts to get right. As I worked, I found myself imagining David's reaction, the surprise when he opened the portfolio, the moment he realized the scope of the gift, the conversation we'd have about Tesla's future, about investment strategies, about building wealth for Tyler's education. This wasn't just about money. It was about showing David that I respected his intelligence, his judgment, his role as a father and husband. It was about proving that my love came without strings attached. By Sunday evening, the gift sat on my dining room table like a work of art. The leather portfolio gleamed under the chandelier light, and I could picture it taking pride of place in David and Sarah's penthouse. This generous gesture would surely open David's heart. Every mile toward San Francisco felt like a step toward redemption. Christmas Eve afternoon had arrived with crisp December clarity. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my navy blue suit and checking my appearance one final time. This wasn't just any family dinner. This was my chance to reclaim my place in my son's life. I selected a bottle of Opus One from the wine cellar, a vintage I'd been saving for a special occasion. The leather portfolio sat waiting on the passenger seat of my Tesla Model S, and I checked the GPS route, even though I could drive to Soma with my eyes closed. The drive south on Highway 101 was surprisingly light for Christmas Eve. Christmas lights twinkled from office buildings and overpasses, and I found myself humming along to holiday jazz, playing through the car's sound system. As I merged onto the freeway, my mind began rehearsing the evening ahead. What would I say first? Should I apologize for the distance between us? Or focus on moving forward? How would Sarah react to seeing me? Would Tyler remember his grandfather? The San Francisco skyline emerged through the evening haze as I crested the hill near Candlestick Point. The city looked magical tonight, with thousands of lights creating a warm glow against the darkening sky. Somewhere in that sprawl of glass and steel, my family was waiting. Soma had transformed dramatically since I'd first started doing business in the city. Where warehouses once stood, sleek residential towers now reached toward the clouds. David had chosen well. His building was one of the most prestigious addresses in the neighborhood. I found parking and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Through the sunroof, I could see the upper floors of David's building, some windows glowing with warm light. Was one of those his penthouse? The building's lobby was all marble and modern art, with a concierge desk that screamed exclusivity. I gave my name and David's apartment number. "Merry Christmas, sir. The Mitchell family is expecting you. 32nd floor." The elevator rose smoothly, and I watched the floor numbers climb with excitement and nervousness I hadn't felt in decades. My reflection showed a man who looked confident, but inside I felt like a father hoping to reconnect with his child. The 32nd floor hallway was elegantly appointed with thick carpeting and tasteful holiday decorations at each doorway. Wreaths hung on several doors, and the subtle scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. Apartment 3208 was at the end of the hall, its door adorned with a sophisticated silver and gold wreath. I could hear the faint sound of conversation and laughter from inside, the warm murmur of family gathering that I'd been missing for far too long. I straightened my tie one final time and took a deep breath. I raised my hand to knock, expecting joy and forgiveness. 30 seconds destroyed 38 years of fatherhood. I knocked twice, firm but respectful, and waited. The sounds of conversation inside seemed to pause. Then I heard footsteps approaching. The multiple locks clicked and turned, and finally the door opened. But only a crack. David's face appeared in the narrow opening, and what I saw there made my stomach drop. No surprise, no joy, no warmth whatsoever. Just cold annoyance, like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting his evening. "What are you doing here?" His voice was flat, unwelcoming. "David's son." I started, confused by his reaction. "Emma invited me for Christmas dinner. I brought something special for you and Sarah and Tyler." I held up the elegant portfolio, but David didn't even glance at it. Instead, he positioned his body to block the doorway completely, one hand gripping the doorframe like a barrier. "We don't want your charity." He said the words hitting me like a physical blow. "Charity, David. This isn't charity. This is family. This is Christmas Eve." My voice cracked slightly. "I just want to spend the evening with my family." That's when Sarah appeared behind him, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw her without any pretense of politeness. Her green eyes held a satisfaction that made my skin crawl, and there was a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "We thought Emma told you not to come?" Sarah said, her voice honey-sweet but poisonous. She placed a possessive hand on David's shoulder, a gesture of ownership that wasn't lost on me. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't David having a bad day or being caught off guard. This was planned, coordinated. Emma's invitation had been real, but they had intended to humiliate me from the start. "Son, please." I tried one last time, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Christmas Eve. We're family. Whatever's wrong between us, we can work it out. I love you." David's face hardened even further, and when he spoke, his voice carried a venom I'd never heard from him before, not even during his worst teenage rebellions. "Get lost, old man. You're pathetic." The words "old man" and "pathetic" hit me like physical blows. Not Dad, not Robert. Old man, pathetic. Like I was some disgusting stranger begging at his door. "Some people just don't know when they're not wanted." Sarah added her mask, slipping completely, now revealing the cruel satisfaction underneath. I stood there, still holding the portfolio that contained $75,000 worth of love and hope, and watched my son's face transform into something I didn't recognize. This wasn't the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. This wasn't the young man who'd called me his hero during his college graduation speech. This was a stranger who looked at me with contempt. "David, please." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the elegant hallway. I heard the locks turning one by one, sealing me out of my son's life as effectively as if he'd built a wall. I stood frozen in the hallway, the expensive portfolio clutched in my trembling hands, surrounded by Christmas wreaths and holiday cheer that now felt like mockery. Through the door I could hear the conversation and laughter resume as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed. The drive home transformed a broken father into something much more dangerous. I walked to the elevator in a daze, my legs moving automatically while my mind struggled to process what had just happened. The elegant hallway felt like a tunnel, and when the elevator doors opened, revealing two other residents dressed for their own Christmas celebrations, their curious stares at my condition barely registered. A woman in a red dress whispered something to her companion as I stepped inside, and I realized I must look as shattered as I felt. The parking garage was a concrete tomb, and when I reached my Tesla, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key fob to work. I slumped into the driver's seat, and for the first time in decades, I broke down completely. The tears came in waves, grief, humiliation, disbelief, all crashing over me at once. How had it come to this? How had my own son looked at me with such contempt? The sound of those locks clicking into place echoed in my head like gunshots. Finally, I managed to start the engine and pull out of the garage. The Christmas decorations lining the San Francisco streets looked garish, now mocking reminders of the holiday spirit I'd foolishly believed could heal old wounds. As I merged onto Highway 101 North, something began to shift inside me. The raw grief was hardening into something colder, more focused. I'd built a business empire by turning obstacles into opportunities, by outmaneuvering competitors who underestimated me. Tonight, I'd been blindsided, but I wouldn't make that mistake again. My phone rang through the car's speakers, and Emma's name appeared on the dashboard display. "Dad, where are you? I just got to David's place, but you're not here." Her voice was confused, concerned. I could hear party sounds in the background, laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. The celebration was continuing without me, as if I'd never existed. "I went home, sweetheart. Wasn't feeling well." I managed trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, you sound upset. What really happened? David and Sarah seem strange. They're acting weird." Emma was perceptive, always had been. But I couldn't drag her into this mess. Couldn't let her see how completely her brother had destroyed me. "Just tired, honey. You enjoy your evening. We'll talk tomorrow." "Are you sure you're okay? I can leave right now." "No," I said firmly. "Stay with your family. Have a wonderful Christmas Eve." After I hung up, the silence in the car was deafening. But in that silence, something cold and calculating began to take shape. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was business. David had declared war when he slammed that door in my face, when he called me pathetic, when he chose humiliation over reconciliation. 40 years in Silicon Valley had taught me that the best response to a hostile takeover wasn't emotion. It was strategy, systematic, methodical, complete. I thought about David's comfortable life, built largely on the foundation I'd provided. The trust funds, the property, the connections, the safety net he'd always taken for granted. He'd just made the biggest tactical error of his life by assuming I was too weak, too sentimental to fight back. At a red light in Palo Alto, I scrolled through my contacts and found the number I needed. "Wilson, it's Robert. I know it's late, but I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Cancel whatever you have scheduled." My lawyer's voice was groggy but alert. "Robert, it's almost midnight on Christmas Eve. What's happened?" "War," I said simply. "David just declared war on the wrong man." There was a pause. "I'll be in the office at 8 a.m. Make it 7. And Wilson, bring everything. Trust documents, property transfers, will modifications, the works. It's time my son learned what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." David had chosen war that night. Now he was going to get it. 40 years of business warfare had taught me how to destroy enemies. Wilson's law office felt like a war room that December 26th morning. Mahogany conference table, floor-to-ceiling law books, and the smell of leather and ambition. My attorney had been handling corporate battles for me since the 90s, and he understood that when I called an emergency meeting, someone was about to lose everything. "Show me David's current holdings." I said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Wilson's desk. The numbers were staggering even to me. Trust funds I'd established over the years, 400,000. Property transfers including the Soma penthouse, 800,000. Investment accounts with my name as guarantor, 600,000. Future inheritance expectations based on my current will, over 1 million. Total exposure, $2.8 million that my son had come to consider his birthright. I want it all revoked, I said, my voice steady as steel. Every gift, every trust, every future expectation. Transfer everything to Emma effective immediately. Wilson had handled hostile corporate takeovers, but this was different. This was family. Robert, are you absolutely certain? Once we file these documents, file them. The paperwork took 3 hours. Revocation of gifts, trust fund dissolutions, will modifications, property title transfers. Each signature felt like a surgical strike, precisely removing David from my financial life with the same clinical efficiency I'd once used to eliminate business competitors. Emma arrived just as we were finishing the final documents. When I explained what had transpired, her face cycled through shock horror, and finally, cold determination. He called you pathetic, she whispered, and I saw her mother's steel in her eyes. On Christmas Eve. Your brother made his choice, I replied. Now he lives with the consequences. I'm with you, Dad, completely. The legal papers were served on January 3rd. David's world imploded exactly as I'd calculated it would. The first call came at 7:43 a.m., just 18 minutes after the process server left his building. David's voice was barely recognizable. High-pitched, panicked, desperate. Dad, please, there's been some mistake. The papers say you're taking everything. Everything. I let it ring 15 times before answering. When I did, my voice carried the same tone I'd used in boardroom negotiations where I held all the cards. No mistake, David. But I can't. We can't survive without... Dad, please, I'm begging you. I hung up. The harassment campaign that followed was systematic in its desperation. Day 115 calls from different numbers as David tried to circumvent my blocks. Day 2 and 3 calls every 2 hours, accompanied by increasingly frantic text messages and emails. Sarah joined the assault on day 3, her messages alternating between fake apologies and barely concealed threats. Robert, this is Sarah. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. David was under stress that night. We both were. Surely we can work this out like adults. I deleted every message without reading past the first line. By day 4, David had recruited friends and colleagues to call on his behalf. My assistant fielded calls from Google employees, former Stanford classmates, even their neighbor from the building. David himself showed up at my company's headquarters twice, only to be turned away by security. The final confrontation call came on day 4 at 11:37 p.m. David was sobbing so hard I could barely understand him. Dad, please, I'm losing everything. The penthouse, the accounts, everything. Sarah's talking about leaving. I can't. I won't survive this. Think about Tyler. He's your grandson. He doesn't deserve this. For just a moment, hearing Tyler's name, I felt a flicker of the old softness. Then I remembered David's face in that doorway. The contempt. The calculated cruelty. You made your choice on Christmas Eve, son. You'll live with the consequences of your decisions. Dad, don't hang up. Please don't. I ended the call and immediately blocked his number permanently. Then I powered off my phone and sat in the silence of my study, surrounded by the empire I'd built and the family I'd just systematically dismantled. The silence that followed was pure justice. Justice served cold tastes sweeter than revenge served hot. 6 months after that December night, I sat in my study on a warm July evening reviewing quarterly reports that showed Emma's remarkable success as our company's new chief financial officer. The numbers told a story of competence, innovation, and the kind of strategic thinking I'd always hoped to pass on to the next generation. Emma had flourished in ways that surprised even me. Without the toxic influence of family drama, she'd thrown herself into the business with passion and intelligence that reminded me of my younger self. The board of directors had unanimously approved her promotion, and our stock price had risen 12% since she'd taken over the financial operations. David's story was the mirror opposite. The bankruptcy filing had been finalized in April. The Soma penthouse was gone, sold to cover debts he'd accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer afford. The divorce from Sarah had been swift and brutal. She'd disappeared to Miami the moment she realized there would be no more money leaving David to fight for custody of Tyler alone. My former son was now living in a studio apartment in Oakland, working as a rideshare driver while trying to rebuild his life from nothing. Emma had mentioned seeing him at a Starbucks near her office, looking hollow-eyed and defeated. I felt no satisfaction in his destruction, but no regret either. He'd made his choices with full knowledge of the consequences. Tyler was the wild card in all of this. At 12, he was old enough to understand that his world had changed dramatically, but too young to fully grasp why. Emma had maintained some contact with him, carefully avoiding any discussion of the family war that had torn his life apart. I was reviewing Emma's latest acquisition proposal when my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Grandpa, it's Tyler." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen for a full minute before opening the message. "I know things are complicated with Dad, and I don't really understand everything that happened, but I remember you. I remember the fishing trips and the stories you used to tell me. When I turn 18, would it be okay if I came to visit you? I think I'd like to know my grandfather again." The tears came without warning, not tears of sadness, but of pure joy mixed with hope I hadn't dared to feel. This boy caught in the crossfire of adult failures had found the courage to reach out across the divide that his parents had created. I typed back immediately. "The door will always be open for you, grandson, always." Emma arrived an hour later for our weekly dinner, and when I showed her Tyler's message, she smiled, with the same mixture of joy and relief I was feeling. "He's a smart kid, Dad. He'll figure out the truth eventually." "The truth is simple," I replied, looking out at the garden where Margaret had once planted roses that still bloomed every summer. "Real family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love that flows both ways." Emma raised her wine glass. "To new beginnings." "To family," I corrected. "The family we choose and the family that chooses us back. Real family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty and love that flows both ways. This betrayal story taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by the choices we make." When my son chose cruelty over compassion on that Christmas Eve, he severed bonds that money couldn't repair. But God works in mysterious ways. Through Emma's unwavering loyalty and Tyler's innocent message, I discovered that real family chooses love over convenience. The Bible teaches us that we reap what we sow, and David learned this truth the hard way. These grandpa stories aren't just about revenge. They're about consequences and redemption. When we turn our backs on those who've sacrificed for us, we lose more than relationships. We lose our souls. Sarah's manipulation couldn't destroy what God intended to preserve. Through this painful journey, I realized that betrayal stories like mine happen in families everywhere, but they also reveal who truly belongs in our circle. Emma proved that loyalty runs deeper than genetics, while Tyler showed that innocence can bridge any divide. Many grandpa stories end in permanent estrangement, but ours offers hope. God has a way of bringing the right people back into our lives when the time is right. The door remains open for Tyler because forgiveness and love should always triumph over pride and pain. True family stands by you in darkness, celebrates your light, and never uses your generosity as weakness. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about your own family experiences, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us what really matters in life.